what we call front door monthly demand for shelter of between 350, 400, sometimes as high as 500 a month, families seeking shelter. And when we took that entitled system to shelter and we added to it the home-based rental assistance program, which was kind of like an MRVP, but it was up to a 3-year benefit, the number of families who came knocking at that door doubled. So we grew within a 2-month period from a demand for shelter of between 350, 400, sometimes as high as 500, to an average demand of 900, and some of those months it was even higher than 900. Now, do I understand that, and does everyone in this room understand that? Absolutely. And if you were a family paying 85% of your income for rent, or 65% of your income for rent, and you found out that if you went and knocked on the door of shelter, you were going to get a voucher, you would go. And if you didn't go, I'd be surprised because you wouldn't be taking care of your kids. So from that, we learned it's very difficult to entitle people who are in our homeless system to a full rental voucher because it's extraordinarily expensive. So again, how do we focus that system? And the way we focused that system was by focusing the entitlement to shelter and really supporting and establishing an emergency shelter safety net that serves the families most at risk. And I'm getting a 2-minute warning here, so I'm clearly not going fast enough. And since we've made that change, the average demand for shelter is back to $350 a month, or 350 families a month, and we've been able to use the resources that we were spending on shelter in expanding our homeless investments. So let me move on because I am running out of time here. So you've asked how effective Homebase has been. This year, we are not providing rental assistance vouchers through the Homebase program. It is strictly a diversion and rapid rehousing tool for families eligible within the shelter program. And diversion is that moment in time when a family comes to shelter to say, I need shelter, and we say to them, you can either enter shelter or you can take home-based household assistance, which is up to a $4,000 benefit, and go use that resource to go back to staying with your friend, go back to staying with your family, go double up with another family and get an apartment. So you can be housed temporarily in a location that's otherwise not shelter or not a motel. And we've had about 12% of families at the front door choose that home-based household assistance benefit. We've also had about 1,400 families almost use household assistance then as a vehicle to leave shelter. So not only can they have it when they come knock on the door of shelter, but they can also leave shelter with household assistance and be housed temporarily, again, doubling up with another family, going back to stay with a family member, or finding other supports. You also asked, and I'm getting my 0 minutes here, so can I take like 2 more and finish my slides? And then you also asked, have average shelter stays changed this year? And I will tell you no. They're still on average 7.5 months per family. However, the ratio of who's in for a long time has changed. So most of our families are staying less than 7.5 months, and we have a smaller number of families that are staying longer than they used to. So the average has actually remained the same, but we see people at more the extremes than more hovering around the middle. Historic trends on rental assistance. I've talked a lot about this. I'll just tell you quickly. The MRVP program at its highest, this is the state mass rental voucher program, was $71.2 million. With its low of $22.7 million in 2004, and under this administration, it's grown back to what we hope will be in fiscal year 14, $46 million. And then we have 2 other voucher programs which are much smaller. We have AHVP, which is a voucher program for households with disabilities, and that program has grown as well as a small program to support families with mental health disorders. So you also asked, is RAFT underfunded? This is our prevention program that grew from $260,000 to $8.7 million. We have with that 8.7 million jumping all the way to the bottom, we will, by the end of this fiscal year, have supported 3,500 families with that prevention resource. And I know there was a question about whether that program is running out of money. I know some regions had sent out the message that they had run out of RAFT. And to let you know, the program is administered in 9 regions around the state. We made the original allocations for RAFT based on what we knew to be trends in demand for shelter. And halfway through the year, we took a look at that, and some regions had spent faster. They ran out. They had a higher demand than we anticipated. Other regions had spent at a much slower pace. So we reorganized the resource, reallocated under the same eligibility rules, and actually have enough money to make it through the rest of the year with the targeting tool that we use to determine eligibility. So we will make it through at least May and possibly June with the 8.7 million and serve 3,500 families. So this year, with these resources, we've supported in shelter and with home base and our rental assistance programs about 9,000 households with the expansion of these resources. And moving through my slides again, I apologize kind of quickly, that we have, in addition to the growth in these programs, proposed in the FY14 budget another 20 million in spending for expansion of RAFT and MRVP. And we haven't determined how that additional 20 million will be allocated across those 2 programs, but I know the administration will be actively working with our partners and many of you to figure out how to best target those resources to continue this transition from our shelter response to our housing response. And I'll just end by just showing you quickly that before we took on the reforms to the homeless system, the combined spending for shelter, motels, RAFT, and MRVP had been 92 million a couple years ago. And in FY14, that total expenditure has grown to a proposed 236 million. So not only are we reorganizing and retargeting how we're using our resources to support those families that we believe are in greatest need, but we're also expanding those investments. Thank you very much for your attention. I know that was a lot of information to throw at you. I'm happy to take questions and also make the slides and information available to folks after the presentation as well.
Any questions for Ms. Heyer? Perhaps I could, first of all, thank you very much.
Sure.
And so much of our issues and questions have been answered by the information you've provided here. I did want to bring up the question of motel population, knowing that the recession has probably impacted that more than anything, and that over the past several years it's nearly tripled. This is the overflow from shelters. When there is no shelter, about 2,000 families in Massachusetts are then housed in motels. And that's been an important priority of DHCD.
To get out of motels,
To
yes.
bring that population down. Can you just comment for us a
Sure.
little bit about where that is?
Sure. So right now, there are 2,100 families who are sheltered in traditional shelter units, and an additional 1,342, I think it was, as of Friday, families living in motels. And I'm proud to tell you that 1,342 is down from a high of 1,800 at the beginning of this past fiscal year. So the shift down in the utilization of shelters, and particularly in motels, and the growth in MRVP and RAFT specifically speaks to that reduction. And we actually expect to be at 1,000 families in motels by the end of this fiscal year, and are modeled to actually get out of motels entirely by the end of next fiscal year. And what I can tell you is that the budget line item for those 1,000 motel units that we're going to pay for next fiscal year is about $29 million of spending. And the trust that the governor has proposed is set up to absorb any savings that come from the reduction in the utilization of those motels. So the $20 million is essentially a down payment on that trust, but it is then a structural resource that is available within the $236 million of spending, that any money we save within all of those programs, including shelters and motels, immediately transfers into our housing and our prevention programs. So hopefully we achieve that goal and we're out of motels because they are no place for children. And we are able to take that nearly $30 million of expenditure next year and reinvest those in further expansion of our housing programs.
Thank you. Any other questions? Gentleman in the center back.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Knowing that we have maybe another year or so where we still making use of motels and hotels for families, I know anecdotally I've heard from several people when families are being placed in the hotels and motels, it may be weeks or a month or even longer before they really are able to get in touch with any support services. So knowing that we have another year plus, how can we make sure we're still taking care of the families that are in the hotels and are making sure they're getting the support services they need?
Great question. We do have agencies that we collaborate with that provide services to these families, and we're actually looking now at ways to try to expand the number of contacts and both on the telephone but also visits to shelter. So we've already stepped up the visits between our staff and the individual motels that are out there to make sure those families do get connected. There's a connection to our providers that are helping those families relocate from shelter with MRVP and with Homebase, but then also linking those families to other support services. So we are doing what we can, and hopefully we'll be expanding over the next 6 months or a year the number of contacts that we're able to make with those families.
I'm a member of Pilgrim Congregational, UCC in Lexington. Can you explain, and we were involved with Sanders Lodge for quite a few years. Can you explain why that was closed? And I believe Mary's Place also in Waltham.
I'm sorry, can you restate?
Sanders Lodge in Waltham, I believe, was closed, and it seemed to be, active and all when members of our church would go to help out for various things. And I believe Mary's Place, a smaller shelter, was also closed.
My apologies. I don't actually have an answer for you on that question. And what I can explain is that my job is to run the affordable housing and public housing programs, and my partner who runs the shelter programs is not here today, and I would expect that she would be able to answer that question. She actually funds the shelter contracts and would know the history of why, if we've stopped contract with a particular shelter, why that's the case. But I can certainly write it down, and I'm happy to get back to you with an answer. Okay, I'll get back to you with that.
Yes, in regards to the home-based programs, how are they going to help those in need after the temporary placement with them? Because when you look into that, it also says that most of the programs, the overall general housing developments, they want a sign saying that you are in a shelter so that you are prioritized. How do you handle those situations?
So you're talking about the families that have rental assistance that
Yes.
are going to only have up to 2 years of assistance in that short-term program?
Yes.
Yes. So we are doing a couple things, and that's a great question. We do have about 6,000 families right now that are supported with the home-based rental assistance program, which I think probably, as many of you know, is not a new benefit that was available this fiscal year. It was a benefit that was only available for several months at the beginning of last fiscal year. And those families receive up to 2 years of support, and that 2 years of support will start timing out in August of this year and run for the next 12 months. So we are doing a few things. We're actually bringing on staff right now and increasing the ratio of staff at our home-based agencies to work with families to help them restructure their housing situations so that when it comes to the end of the rental assistance benefit, many of those families will not be positioned to absorb the full cost of the rent in those apartments. So we are working with families to move out of, if they need to, those situations using household assistance
Okay.
back to other supports in the community, or to look at opportunities for doubling up or sharing informal housing situations with other families.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to have to move along, and I would encourage anyone who has questions to join us during the discussion groups. There's an opportunity there, and as well, when we're finished, we'll have some time to interact down in the parish hall downstairs. So I want to
Great.
thank
Thank
you very
you.
much.
Thank
for
you.
your time. A good ally of the advocacy work that all of the organizations have done is with Mass Coalition for the Homeless. They've been strong and very knowledgeable over the years, and a good support for the advocacy network. We speak with all the advocacy groups. MCH is right there with us all the time. Today, we're happy to present Kelly Turley with the Mass Coalition for the Homeless. She can comment on the work that Mass Coalition is doing and their positions on a number of the things that Lizbeth has spoken about, and as well, a new initiative that we're very hopeful will bear some fruit in helping unaccompanied youth, a category of folks who have kind of been forgotten. And for a number of circumstances, there's a lot of young people out there, invisible and struggling. And so we're very interested to hear more about unaccompanied youth. So help me welcome Kelly Turley, Mass Coalition for the Homeless.
Hi, I'm Miriam Stein. I'm the advocacy consultant to the Advocacy Network to End Family Homelessness. I'll tell you a little about our next speaker, Kelly Turley, that Frank has referred to. For the past 15 years, Kelly Turley has been an advocate with and for people experiencing homelessness and poverty. Since 2002, she has worked for the Mass Coalition for the Homeless, where she is now the Director of Legislative Advocacy. In that role, she collaborates to develop public policy strategies to create access to homeless prevention benefits, safety net resources, and affordable housing for families and individuals. Ms. Turley is also an active member of the advisory board of the Massachusetts Interagency Council on Housing and Homelessness. She's a co-chair of the Youth Homelessness Working Group and the newly established Massachusetts Unaccompanied Homeless Youth Commission. Previously, Ms. Turley worked as an advocate for extremely low-income families and individuals in Boston and Philadelphia. In addition to her housing and homeless advocacy, Ms. Turley is a longtime human rights activist and coordinator of Amnesty International Local Group 133 of Somerville. Let's welcome Kelly Turley.
Thank you so much for having me here today. On behalf of the Coalition, I want to really extend our gratitude to all of you here from the Advocacy Network and Cooperative Metropolitan Ministries for all of your support over the years for the work of the coalition, because none of this work to be able to approach ending or preventing homelessness can be done if it's not done in community, if it's not done in unison. And we know that that unison has to be not only with those of us here in the room, but those of us beyond this room, working in collaboration with the administration and Lizbeth's colleagues, and working with the wonderful legislators that we have here today. And I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to talk to you a bit about the work of the coalition, and in particular about our work on unaccompanied youth homelessness issues. Frank asked me just to talk quickly about some of kind of following up from Lizbeth's points around the mass rental voucher program. We hope that you will help us this year as we work through the fiscal year 14 budget advocacy process, really push the legislature to make a significant reinvestment in the program. Back in the 1990s, that program was funded at over $120 million. And so we're really grateful that the Patrick administration and the legislature have been increasing funding for the program the past several years. And as Lizbeth mentioned, it's funded at $42 million this year. We're hoping to be able to bring that program up to $60 million in the fiscal year 14 budget so that we can support 1,400 new subsidies to help families, individuals, and hopefully youth exit homelessness into housing or stabilize their housing situation. So we think that that ask is reasonable, and Diane Sullivan is here from Homes for Families, who's leading the campaign to increase funding for the mass rental voucher program through the Housing Solutions campaign, and so we'll have more information and some time to talk afterwards. But we know that we can't end homelessness unless we have housing, and on the home-based program, we're really supportive of hoping that the administration and the legislature can work together to ensure that no family that currently has a subsidy is left homeless at the end. Initially, as Lizbeth mentioned, it was designed as a 3-year program, and because of funding shifts and increased demand, it's currently a 2-year program. We're really concerned that starting in August, families who previously experienced homelessness will have to return to homelessness because their subsidy is ending. DHCD's data shows that more than 98% of the families currently in the home-based program, when that subsidy goes away, would pay more than 50% of their income towards rent. 78% of the families in home-based now, according to the data, would be paying more than 100% of their income towards rent. So we know that that's not possible. So the state, together, we need to craft solutions to make sure that families and children who've already been traumatized by homelessness do not return to homelessness. And we know that this is something that's doable with administration and a legislature that cares about homelessness, and people like you in this room and beyond that can use their voices to join together to prevent and end homelessness. So we feel a sense of concern because those deadlines are coming, but we know that people of conscience around the state are looking at this issue, and so we're hopeful that united we can craft some solutions. And we're really grateful, as Lizbeth mentioned, that we went from funding the RAFT program for homelessness prevention from $260,000 to $8.8 million in this fiscal year. That's a huge shift, and I know that Frank and Carl had asked, well, don't we want to ask for more? And we're like, well, you know, we know how the legislature works, and we're really grateful for those reinvestments. And so we kind of, sometimes we know when not to ask for more money, not all the time, but once in a while. So we're like, all right, well, let's just maintain the funding for this year and then hopefully make the case that we need to continue to invest in homelessness prevention. So you are all key allies in this struggle, and where we want to ask you for your support, in particular today, from the coalition's perspective, is on our initiatives around unaccompanied youth homelessness. We know that family homelessness and individual homelessness, there have been line items in the state budget that have really funded programs for a long time, but we find that for unaccompanied youth up to age 24 who are experiencing homelessness and out on their own, there really isn't a state line item to point to support their programs for housing and support services. So we've been working with the legislature and the administration to create a special statewide commission to look at the issues for youth who are experiencing homelessness and out on their own without a parent or guardian. And that special commission got started in December and was set to release a report in March to be able to look at how can we as a state address the needs of youth, particularly youth who are under age 18, who aren't of the age of majority and are out there on their own, and youth who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, their particular needs, but also the needs of all youth who are under 24 and out there on their own. We've been working with all the legislators present here today, Representative Stanley, Senator Barrett, Representative Conroy, Senator Eldridge, and Representative Atkins on a bill, House Bill 135, and Act 2, provide housing and support services for unaccompanied homeless youth. That bill was filed in the House by Representative O'Day and by Senator Catherine Clark of Melrose. And that bill would create investments at a statewide level to provide housing and support services to youth under age 24. And I wanted to invite up some of our collaborators on the youth campaign, joined today by Jeremy and Erica Nazaro. They're from the Young Adult Resource Network, a program out of the Home for Little Wanderers in Boston. And Jeremy is going to share his experiences as a youth and a participant in the YARN program, and hopefully help inspire you to stay connected to the work of the coalition and groups like YARN to be able to promote the need for more housing and support services for youth.
Hello, my name is Jeremy. I'm now in a place in my life where I have an apartment, but in the past, when I was living with my mother, also under the care of DCF, which is the Department of Children and Families, I've lived in numerous different shelters, mainly because I lived in numerous different shelters because of me being gay and openly gay. There was a lot of harassment, there was a lot of kind of bullying.